Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Post Daily News Show. I am John Pollock. Wei Ting is off today, but we have brought in the heavy artillery for today's discussion. We're going to be going into the WWE's ongoing relationship with Saudi Arabia, and I thought that these two individuals would be the perfect people to have on. First up, returning for the second time this week, you know him as the man behind WrestleNomics that can be heard every Sunday here on the Post Wrestling Network, Brandon Thurston, who has brought out the shirt and tie for today's discussion. So you know it's a big one.
Yes. This isn't breaking news. This is scheduled news. So
Yes.
I was able to put on the tie before I left the house this morning.
Biggest draw in the short history of the Post Daily News Show, Brandon Thurston, with his past Tuesday show by significant leaps and bounds.
I think Cody gets some credit there, but yes.
Minimal. But also joining us, a man that you have read his work with such outlets as Deadspin, Business Insider, Fanbyte. He is behind Babyface, V Heel, and Between the Sheets, your favorite follow on Twitter. We are talking about David Bixenspan, who is here with us. Mr. Bixenspan, how are you?
I mean, maybe I'm your favorite follow on Twitter.
Oh, everyone's a must follow, both of you, in the pro wrestling space. So today we wanted to kind of spend some time talking a bit more in depth about the WWE relationship to Saudi Arabia and sort of the coverage that comes with that. And I think it's like an interesting topic because it's one that I think many people are kind of at odds with, of how you really go about and cover these shows. And Brandon, you kind of got this ball rolling in my head last Friday when you put out the thread that you did. And my first question is whether you just sent this and walked away or you came back for the mentions afterwards, because, I mean, it's one of those things where you are going to get a very divisive response to something like that. But I think those are all the subjects that are front and center that people kind of are in conflict when it comes to these shows.
Yeah, well, on a personal note, I've recently decided that I will no longer look at any replies or any quote tweets in response to my own tweets. So it was very easy to just tweet it, and then I haven't looked at any of the response to it, other than I can see the numbers and whatnot. But yeah, it's I guess I was hearing about all the tweets that were being put out, apparently because W sent out a news slam, which seems to be their internal messaging to wrestlers and employees, and everyone was using the line, "W continues to influence the world." And they were sharing the Becky Lynch and Lita poster, billboard that's advertising the Crown Jewel event in Saudi Arabia. So I thought it was a good time to revisit the problems with W in Saudi Arabia.
And David, maybe you just want to refresh people, like the WWE's history, like in Saudi Arabia, like it goes back to the first set of shows were 2014. And these were like very small, like live events that kind of just flew under the radar. And then we got the announcement of the big, 10-year deal that happened in early 2018.
Right. I feel like the shows before they actually were partnering or being bought by the government, however you want to put it, I feel like the thing that got the most attention at the time was that Sami Zayn was on the shows because he wasn't on the main roster yet, which, boy, with hindsight, does that feel interesting and bizarre, being that he's been kept off of all of these shows by the request of the Saudi royal family, either because he's Syrian, presumably, or because he's raising money for charities that help people who were killed by bombs that were made by Saudi Arabia, or dropped by Saudi Arabia, I guess would be the right way to put it.
Yeah, and I think it's really like that first show was such a, I think there was a lot of, questions asked and conflict going into the first show, but just the presentation of that first show, Brandon, where you just saw like what these were, like very overt in terms of the propaganda that was going to be utilized on these shows, an extremely like mind-boggling angle leaning on the conflict involving Iran and Saudi Arabia using the Davari brothers. It was just a show that even if you wanted to go in and just try and divorce this show from politics, that show would not allow you to do such a thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to give anybody the false impression that I'm like a international affairs expert, but I think the W's relationship with Saudi Arabia has, to look at it in one positive light, is that it's caused me and probably a lot of other people to learn a lot about Saudi Arabia's place in the world and all the issues around women's rights, all the issues around LGBT rights, the blockade of Yemen. So in April 2018, when the first show happened, this wasn't as big a deal yet. That would come in the second show in November 2018 because it came so close in terms of the timing to the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. But that first event, it didn't have that much controversy, that much light shed on the controversy yet. But the pre-show played this video that was, I imagine, prepared by the Saudi government itself, just sort of celebrating, women can drive now, and they have the new progressive leader, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So that was played on the pre-show, pretty clearly a video, a public relations video, meant to push forward the Saudi Vision 2030 agenda, which is their economic and public relations plan to sort of wean themselves off of oil and to grow the economy and to repair Saudi Arabia's image in the world. That happened at the end. There's the Saudi official awarding the greatest Royal Rumble title to Braun Strowman along with Vince McMahon. You've got John Cena making comments about how great it is to be in the country and for welcoming WWE there. That to kick off the relationship. But things would get quite a bit worse and quite a bit more scrutiny in the second event, because the second event in November happened, I think, 1 month exactly from the day that Jamal Khashoggi was killed in Turkey by Saudi agents.
And I do want to add, too, with that Davari brothers angle, it needs to be pointed out that Sean Davari was not working for the company at the time.
Yeah.
He had not come back as a producer yet. Arya was the only one who was on the roster, and they were introduced as being from Iran when Arya had been introduced from the Twin Cities the whole time he'd been in the company. So
Yeah,
it was
like-
super heavy-handed.
Yeah, and I mean, they have Arya has spoken about it, about the response that they have got to the extent of death threats after the fact for the angle. I mean, it just seemed like it was just a show that I think, even if you are the most apolitical viewer of this, I mean, it really just threw this right into your face that you would have to confront this, and that was only exacerbated by the second show, which was where I think was the most contentious one, with the proximity to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and the fact that this was one that certainly went outside of just simply wrestling coverage and unrest to this was like a mainstream story of major American businesses working or not working with Saudi Arabia. And here is a company that was right in bed with the government going back for this show, so close, and even impacted the stock price, Brandon, that we can go back to. There were real, you saw real effects here of this move, but also one that they kind of just plugged their nose, went through it, and essentially that has really been kind of a strategy of WWE. Just absorb whatever negativity is coming your way, push through, and the consequences ultimately are not there. They came out of it relatively unscathed and continued this very wealthy partnership.
Yeah, it's at the time there were questions about this on the earnings call, but they gave a very brief statement on the earnings call right after this event and said that they weren't going to, because I think actually the earnings call was days before the Crown Jewel event. Now that I'm thinking of it, it was days before. So, and there was still uncertainty before, in the hours and minutes before the earnings call happened, whether or not that event was going to happen. I think there were reports or speculation that maybe they would move that event to the UK or something like that. Mm-hmm. But they confirmed on that earnings call that they would be going ahead with the event, despite the heinous act, was their terminology. But yeah, it did push the stock price down a bit. There are problems too that we can probably get to later about a MENA TV rights deal that never happened. But it pushed the stock price down a bit, at least in the short term. And I think what we've learned though is that WWE, there's a hierarchy of influence, an image that we've shared on the WrestleNomics Twitter at one point, that Vince McMahon is at the top and fans are way down at the bottom. But what's second from the top is business partners. And actually Saudi Arabia is, I would say, they're at this moment their number 3 business partner, just behind NBC Universal and Fox in terms of the customer that gives them the most money. And SEC filings make that pretty clear to me. So, yeah, unless business partners were going to come forward and start to put pressure on W to do something and to cancel that show or to stop this deal in general, uh, that that's the lesson. What I call the Snickers doctrine. It takes Snickers. It takes a business partner to complain to WWE to put pressure on them for them to do something in response to controversy. It seems.
And David, you were doing a lot of reporting and writing, throughout this deal, but especially around that Crown Jewel event in 2018. And this is one where, like, I'm sure we can all share our experiences that trying to get any kind of substantive statement out of WWE, it's just not going to be something you're going to have a whole lot of success with. And did you find that in your reporting? Like, this seems to be the strategy of WWE, is that for these kinds of topics, like, we're not even going to put out a statement. We're going to put the bare minimum out. Like, ahead of that investors call, it was a very brief reasoning for why they're continuing to do this, but that's kind of the MO that they have found that kind of PR strategy of.
I mean, it's been increasingly difficult for anyone to get a statement out of WWE about anything the last few years. I've generally had a harder time than most during that period, but I mean, it wasn't even just WWE. So you guys may remember, I think it was Dave Meltzer that had reported that there was some pressure from the federal government on them to not do the show. I forget if he specified the State Department, but for one of the articles I was doing at Deadspin, I reached out to the State Department. I said, is this true? And they were giving these indirect answers, blah, blah, blah. The State Department does not exercise any role in such matters. And I just, okay, but sure, but that's not answering the question. Did you actually communicate with them in any way saying not to do the show? And the email I got back was, off the record, no. Now, for those of you who are not journalists or familiar with how this works, off the record is an agreement. You cannot unilaterally put something off the record. Now, in the shoes of the reporter, sometimes you have to weigh that against if you're going to have a future relationship with that company or that PR person. In this case, I didn't really see myself needing to deal with the State Department again, so I included it. The fact that they felt the need to say off the record to actually deny it, to me, said a lot.
Yes. There's always I always try to really understand the utilization of off the record, sometimes for the most bizarre answers that you are getting. Brandon, just in terms of now that we, like, I think, like, in terms of just a mainstream focus, it was certainly that 2018 show in November. I think inside of the wrestling world, you could certainly look at 1 year later with the flight delay and how that impacted SmackDown the next night, the lawsuit that would ultimately result in a settlement of $39 million. But as we stand today, like, where do you sense kind of the public's appetite for these shows, the questions that come with it? Because I think it has just been something where this is a deal they are locked into, and I think that there is certain fatigue, and I can understand that among the fan base. But I do think these are very important subjects to still be tackling and discussing, rather than just sort of just accepting that this is how it's going to be conducted.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the end of the Twitter thread that you brought up earlier, the getting numb to it that I think you and Wei have talked about, the getting numb to it and it just becoming a regular thing, which it's going to be for 10 years in total. We're 4 years into it, maybe 11 years because of the pandemic delay, that it's for the deal to do what the Saudi government wants it to do, which is to broadcast a globally televised event throughout the world on Peacock, domestically here in the United States, on the W Network, internationally, to show an event that you can sort of watch it and be like, well, what's the big deal? These people look like they're all right. They're having a good time. They're watching a big United States-based entertainment event. Saudi Arabia doesn't look like that bad of a country. And I'm hearing all these critical things about it. I don't know. This looks okay. And hey, women are wrestling in big shirts, but they're wrestling. The public needs to be worn down for the deal to have the effect that they want it to have. But yeah, we can talk about too the shareholders lawsuit and the delay in Riyadh, where the Saudi government, what happened with the shareholders lawsuit is there's a class action shareholders lawsuit against WWE because they were supposed to do a media TV rights deal in Middle East, North Africa with a television company called MBC. They lost their previous TV partner, OSN, in the region. They were apparently trying to make a deal with Middle East Broadcasting Company, which the Saudi government took control of as part of the 2017 Riyadh shakedown, where they loaded a lot of powerful business people and politicians into a large hotel. And to make a long story short, ended up seizing a lot of their assets. So the government majority controls that NBC network, but they never ended up making a deal with the WWE as WWE expected and told shareholders, both in terms of George Barrios, the CFO at the time, doing conferences and in earnings calls. So stockholders were expecting this media TV rights deal to happen, which would allow WWE to reach its profit projection that it had publicly stated. So that deal never happened. It appears because there's this pirate broadcaster called Be Out Q that may be funded by the Qatari government to troll the Saudi government. So WWE programming seems to be available in the region because of a pirate broadcaster. This led to the lawsuit, which I was looking at today again, and we get some confirmation about the fact that the deal really is worth $50 million. But also it interviews an anonymous former WWE talent who says that talent relations, Mark Carano at the time, told this WWE talent that there was a disagreement between Vince and Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto leader, crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and that Vince ordered that the broadcast be cut in the middle of it for that Crown Jewel 2019, or was it Super Showdown anyway? And that purportedly would be the reason why the flight was delayed on Halloween 2019, which resulted in a lot of wrestlers not making it to SmackDown. Vince, by the way, and a few others left on the corporate jet. But yeah, it resulted in a settlement. So WWE did not want to fight this and allow this to go to Discovery. Allowing it to go to Discovery would have made a lot of records public that might have shed more light on this relationship between WWE and Saudi Arabia. People like Bix and I would be the first to look that stuff over. So they settled that lawsuit for $39 million that their insurers pay. So it's not something that came right out of WWE's pockets here. But it's caused some problems for WWE. There's some costs, but ultimately, financially, looking at it purely from a financial standpoint, it's worth $50 million every time they go there, $110 million a year. So they just reported $1 billion in revenue. That's 10% of their entire company's revenue that they're getting just for these shows. So I look at it as a controversy fee.
Yeah, and David, I mean, I know you wrote about it extensively at the time, but there are still, I think, so many questions that people have about that October 2019 event. The fact that, I mean, not only did you have like evidence of the broadcast, I believe, starting like an hour after its like advertised start time. So it's like there is smoke there. Whether it's in completely, it links the two, there is evidence that it started late. And then on top of it, something very unfamiliar for at least from following a WWE set of like mindset is the amount of tweets we had come out from like wrestlers, family members as well. Like this is not one where it was just vent in private and put on a happy face. Like there were a lot of disgruntled people and by extension family members who were at least concerned. And I think it's still like an area that I'm sure WWE does not want people to be going into any kind of depth, regardless of what is there or not there.
And John, if I could just jump in and add like one more detail.
Sure.
The claim was that the Saudis were behind on their payments to WWE, and we did see that in their accounts receivable line in their SEC filings. So somebody owed them a lot of money. On the Halloween Day earnings call that was also happening that day, the day of the show.
It was the same day as the show, yeah, that worked out with the earnings call, yes.
Vince was not on the call, but Barrios was. Barrios said, we just got a $60-some-odd million payment. Didn't say who it was from, but it's apparently from the Saudis. So that was before the show happened, though. So the timing, I don't know. There's smoke to this, but the timing doesn't look super obvious. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, David, as well, kind of like your own reporting at that time, and again, like this is one where it's very atypical to see talent be to kind of vent publicly. I mean, that is something, not to say it's unheard of, but nonetheless, it's not the norm.
I don't know how I got my camera out of sort there. I don't know. I'm not getting a good angle. There we go. I mean, one thing we need to stress too, I think, with this is, besides, yes, that, you know, you look at Twitter, you know, NBC Action was not tweeting about the show until an hour in, treating, you know, their hour delayed version with the screenshots and GIFs and everything is live, even though it had been advertised for an hour earlier and there was no explanation as to why it got moved back an hour. You can see fans tweeting at them, tweeting at Dave Meltzer from, you know, Saudi Arabia and other places in the Middle East, asking why the show wasn't airing there yet. So that happened. WWE gave someone, I think it was maybe Justin Barrasso, maybe Alfred Ganoa, did give someone a statement saying that just whatever issue there was had nothing to do with anything else. But
Mechanical issues.
But they've never given any explanation for the TV thing. Now, as far as the flight, I mean, I'll take you through what I heard that night. So I get a message from someone else in wrestling media who's a mutual acquaintance of all three of us, saying, actually, let me read it. I have it in the blog I wrote. So it was a little after midnight, and I get this message. Have you heard anything about everyone coming back from Saudi? Keep alert. I'm getting it handed down that something's up and they're not making SmackDown. So then I message one of the wrestlers that's on that I know is there, and they reply, "Big shit show. We're all pretty certain we're being held hostage." That is from someone on the plane at that moment. And I'll read. I mean, I don't need to say they. It's before they had the women's matches. I can say he. Here's what he said when he wrote it down in more detail. While sitting in the airport initially, we're told to line up to get on the plane. Then we were told it would be 10 more minutes. Then about 30 minutes later, we were told it's going to be another 30 minutes. After an hour goes by, we get another 10 minutes. No one is telling us what's going on or why we're being held. Then finally, we're told it's because we have to refuel the plane, so it may take another hour. Why should we need to refuel the plane now when it's been sitting in the exact same position it was when it dropped us off 2 days prior? The reason for charters is to get a group of people out on time and have everything ready to go. And AJ Styles, though mostly defending WWE at the time, did back up the claim that they were told that it hadn't been refueled. Mm-hmm. So that's absolutely corroborated. And then, you know, from the wrestler I talked to, in the blog I wrote, I didn't quote it all directly, but he said they were told the technician who could fill the fuel tank was not around, then told 3 minutes later they were good to board. And I did reach out to WWE when I wrote this, and when I originally drafted it, and then asking, and they didn't reply, giving any reason for the conflicting explanations to the talent. And then we all get on the plane. We haven't eaten a meal in 8 hours. I ask the flight attendants what's going on. He told me he had no idea why they were holding us. If it was mechanical, wouldn't they let someone know? He said all he knows is for some reason these people don't care to get you guys out of here. Pilot jumps on the intercom, says, "Folks, I'm sorry, but we're not sure what's going on. It's beyond our control, and we're not going to be able to leave right now. Please bear with us."
Yeah, and this, of course, just for those that are not familiar, this, of course, was the SmackDown that featured, you know, all of the NXT talent that was rushed in to fill up the show, because it was going to be a significant amount of the roster unavailable, which is like another interesting element to this deal, that if you're Fox and hear this show that you have the assurance that the travel is taken care of. We have a chartered flight that is to mitigate any of these kind of issues, and here is our live broadcast that we may not have our stars available for, and even this week, like this is one where SmackDown's getting a taped show this week, which was something when you look at back during the pandemic. It's not like they were bringing everyone down to the Performance Center for 3-4 days to tape 2 months of shows. It was, it was a routine coming down. They were doing, I think, like 2 shows and then, coming back because of that idea of not tape. They weren't bulk taping. So that's an interesting aspect of this as well, that this deal, they have had to shift around certain broadcasting practices for Fox on top of it. When it comes to the follow-up lawsuits, Brandon, where are we at with those? Because there were a few that kind of followed in the wake of the initial one as well. Is that accurate? And are those, because I know some were all lumped in, but are there still outstanding ones now?
My understanding is that they were all put together as one class action lawsuit, and the period to claim. So the period is February 7th. If you held W shares between this time, you could have collected some damages as a result of this lawsuit being settled for shareholders February 7th, 2019 to February 5th, 2020. So just under a year-long period. But yeah, they've all been settled. It's too late to make a claim now, but they ended up suing the board of directors specifically. I was just looking through today, and there are some meeting minutes that were exhibits in the lawsuit. Those are all sealed. I was excited that maybe I was going to find some meeting minutes from W board of directors meetings, but not so. But they seem to be all, I would say, settled and finished. But WWE did list in their legal proceedings all of these cases again. Then again, they still list the CTE lawsuits in their latest annual report as ongoing. So for all intents and purposes, though, I don't expect any big news coming out of these suits going forward.
Mm-hmm. It's also like when you look at various performers, like we mentioned Sami Zayn, that we are of the impression cannot go and do these shows, but he has really not spoken about this publicly, nor to my knowledge has he been asked about this. And you have other performers that have just from Crown Jewel 2018 onward. Kevin Owens was not going to the shows. Bryan Danielson was not going on to the shows. John Cena was not going to the shows as well. But it does seem like this is like a subject that really does not come up in, when, I'm not expecting like a John Cena to be asked this on some of the outlets he's doing. But it's also like, it seems like this is one where everyone's going to like run from this subject and not really tackle like the whys. And it's just interesting to see like such a major story, but it's one that I don't think is going to get broached on any kind of meaningful level.
Yeah, it's interesting that John Cena apparently made a choice to not do the Saudi shows after the Khashoggi killing, but that he's so careful about not upsetting the Chinese government. There was that controversy several months ago where he accidentally referred to Taiwan as a country, and the Chinese government doesn't view Taiwan as a country, and he put out this big apology. But yeah.
How do I put this? One thing I think we need to stress that doesn't really get talked about that much is, though, yes, seemingly as a consequence of WWE negotiating things after the Khashoggi murder, the really overt propaganda has not been part of the show since the first show, although I think to say they're not propaganda is ridiculous, because it doesn't have to be screaming in your face to be propaganda. I mean, there's value in just the shows being there and then what they put on their own, Saudi government social media accounts. But there's something we need to stress, because I feel like this rarely gets brought up. Yes, have a lot of companies been doing a lot of business with Saudi Arabia as part of Vision 2030 and their whole plan to make them seem more mainstream and modern and progressive? Yes. However, as best as I can tell, only 2 companies made deals with them that were like the WWE deal, where it seems like they were required to actually do like active propaganda for them. WWE and seemingly American Media Inc., the parent company of the National Enquirer, who I think it was around the same time as Greatest Royal Rumble, maybe a month or two before, out of nowhere, put out this, like, you know how, like, People and some other, and I guess AMI and some other magazine companies will put out, like, just random glossy magazines about, like, celebrity that just died or anniversary of whatever. AMI put one out that was basically just glorifying Saudi Arabia for no apparent reason. So when we talk about this, like, yes, are a lot of companies doing business there? Yes. Did, Matchroom Boxing sell a big fight or two to the Saudi government to run there? Yes. But other than the location, that and the other sporting events generally, you wouldn't have any idea that they were bought by the Saudi government specifically unless you had read the news about it. The broadcasts themselves were normal, for lack of a better term. So WWE is doing something different from just about everyone else, and that's doing business there. And I don't feel like that's really brought up that much.
And I think as well, like when you look at, Jamal Khashoggi, I mean, it was just such a seismic event worldwide that so many people were just aghast by. And yet you are only a short time removed from MBS going on this world tour and really selling Vision 2030. And it's very much being presented as like the new face of Saudi Arabia. This is someone, he's on the front cover of Time magazine. He's on with Oprah. Like, it was very much like a worldwide public relations tour to present like the evolution of Saudi Arabia. And I think it was the Jamal Khashoggi murder that completely separated that branding that they were certainly out for. Like, that was a huge part of Vision 2030, was literally putting a new face on Saudi Arabia on top of it.
Yeah, and my understanding is that Jamal Khashoggi is a journalist, columnist for the Washington Post. He was living in the United States, I believe in Virginia. He was a Saudi citizen. He was trying to finalize his divorce so that he could marry his fiancée. To do that, he understood that he had to go to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, which is where he was met by Saudi agents and then ultimately killed, dismembered. So my understanding is that he was not, it's not as if he was super critical of the Saudi government. He seems to have been mildly critical on social issues towards them. And yet it was enough that the Saudi government, whether or not MBS authorized it, I believe the CIA believes that he did, or at least had knowledge of it, they felt they had to silence him. But as far as we should probably point out what are the state of women's rights here, as WE talks about being part of the change, and putting on women's matches is contributing to this sort of message of Saudi Arabia being this more accepting country. In that, so women did get the right to vote in 2015. They got the right to drive in 2018, although just before they were given the right to drive, some of the activists who pushed for women having the right to drive were jailed and tortured. In 2019, women are now allowed to register to vote, to register for divorce or marriage. They're now allowed to live alone. They're now allowed to travel alone. And where they're doing the show on Saturday, Jeddah is more permissive than Riyadh is. But there's still a lot of limits to what women are allowed to do because of the male guardianship system. I've tried to watch. I don't know if you guys have noticed. Are the men and women separated in the audience on these shows? I imagine that they are.
I was just trying to look up what the ticket sales and stuff site said, because at least I know for at least the first few shows, it was phrased in a way that I want to say it was either quote unquote, what was it, singles or families was the way they phrased it.
I think that was right, yeah.
And that singles were individual men, and that everyone else was families where either a child or an adult woman would need to be accompanied by a male guardian. But I'm trying to find it. Let's see.
I'm glad that Brandon did differentiate Riyadh from Jeddah, because if you caught Bill Goldberg's Instagram video this morning, he put his camera out to the skyline and said, "Here in beautiful Riyadh," and then he had to note afterwards, We're actually in Jeddah. It was a very long flight, so it's a good thing Bill Goldberg knows what city he is in.
He's
ahead of
there.
Saturday
He
show.
didn't
He is
know
there.
what city he was in.
He was under the impression he was in Riyadh, but did post the correction afterwards. I'm curious as well for both of you. Is this a show? Are you two like sitting down and actually watching this show? Like, I'm kind of curious just as well about just your own kind of WWE consumption. Is this a show you'll watch, Brandon?
I watch limited amounts of WWE content. I do put on the pay-per-views pretty consistently. These shows, because they've been in the middle of the day here at U.S. time, at times they've been in the middle of the daytime when I'm busy doing other things. So I will kind of catch the. I do have specific memories of that Undertaker Goldberg match, watching that live. So I must have caught that big main event. But this is a Saturday afternoon show. I don't know. It depends on how busy I am. It's on Saturday afternoon, but I don't know. It's not an event I'm excited about. I think, like, thinking about it creatively, but first let's talk about popularity. I think there's a preponderance of issues that have contributed to WWE's apparent decline in popularity over the last 6-7 years. But I think that these events are one of them in two different ways, both in terms of the moral factor, fans not approving of it, but also the priority that's put on them sort of without any build, and the sort of piling in all these legends and whatnot. It seems to water down the creative of the entire calendar of events somewhat as well.
Do you sense the same, David, just in terms of the fan engagement for these shows? Like, it certainly seems to be ones that, I mean, obviously there's no expense spared for the shows, and I just wonder if there's honestly been like a meaningful kind of disengagement when it comes to these shows, or rather that this is kind of just accepted as, these are shows they go to twice a year. We might not be crazy about these shows, but at the end of the day, I'm a WWE fan and I'm being told these are important shows and I'm going to treat them as such.
I mean, I think a lot of it was just the time and day that so many of these were on weekday afternoons too, right? And the last one was the first one that was on was the last one on the weekend, or was that still a weekday?
No, I think they've all been Thursdays up until this point, if I'm not mistaken.
Some were Friday, maybe. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if there's more engagement this weekend, because this is also the first time they've done a mainline pay-per-view there, as opposed to adding a show to the calendar, which is something we haven't really talked about yet. Like, not only, you said, it's 4 years and it's a good time to reevaluate this. Another reason is that this is the first time they're taking an existing show there, and it's one, it's the Bridge to WrestleMania show where they're going to set the stuff that's not set by the Royal Rumble. Like, this is in many ways the biggest show they've done. It's the one at the big new stadium. They're doing the Reigns Goldberg match that, was supposed to happen 2 years ago at Mania and didn't. So I'm curious to see how the reaction is going to be. I mean, me personally, I'll probably just be doing podcast editing, so I'll probably just have it on in the background. But with the 3 women's matches, also, I'm curious to see how overboard do they go in the more propaganda type aspects, because since they've started having women on the shows again, that's when the more outward obvious propaganda has kind of returned, but only in that context, which I kind of think is by design. Like, that was the compromise, that you can't go so overt anymore, because after Khashoggi and after some of the response to the first show, even before Khashoggi, it's not tenable for WWE as a business doing business internationally. But, you get to stress, they're more progressive now. Look, we helped, we're bringing women's wrestling over here. I'm curious to see just how heavy-handed they get with it on a show that has, more women's matches than most, domestic WWE pay-per-views have had lately.
Certainly, like that. I think like that's the major focus of this entire show is the women's component on Saturday, and we'll wrap this up in just a couple of minutes. You two have been very generous with your time, but like another aspect to all of this is that this is happening right in concert with the Winter Olympics, and like I'm not following the Olympics at all, but it seems like the large sentiment is that a lot of people are disengaged with the Olympics, and it is because of the conflicts of China and the IOC being so tied into here that on a larger scale, such as the Winter Olympics, like it's a significant turnoff for people. And I think these are kinds of, when you're talking about massive amounts of money with autocratic governments, these are conflicts that more and more fan bases have to confront and sort of have like, what is your ethical limit that you have when it comes to your form of entertainment that you're going to enjoy? Because the idea of just sitting down and watching something devoid of politics, I think that's becoming tricky for a larger percentage of people.
Yeah, all on Peacock too. Olympics.
That's right. Yes.
And the Crown. Oh, this is Elimination Chamber. All on Peacock and NBC Universal. As our friend MJ from NJ told me, they're double dipping. I think it's important to clarify too the amount of money here and how these are different events than any other wrestling event that W puts on. In that, in most cases, it's, you know, when we're talking about international events or any live event that W puts on, they're putting on an event in a market, and then people buy tickets, and then W collects on that revenue. Right, and this, I don't know who's collecting the revenue. I imagine the government's probably collecting the ticket revenue for these events. But WWE is getting a $50 million payment from the government. It's as an indie wrestler, sometimes we would, this show's a bought show, which means it's paid up front. It's paid in advance, so it almost doesn't matter what you draw. So it's clearly the value, the product that the government is paying for is not being covered by the ticket sales or any other revenue that's being generated as a result of the event.
Someone wants to buy a show. I think they just heard
somebody's trying to shut us down right now. But so $50 million. Put that in some context. The context I like to put it in is the biggest pro wrestling event ever in terms of live event ticket sales is WrestleMania 32, $17.3 million. These events are $50 to $55 million. So if you multiply that, the biggest wrestling event ever, the biggest live gate ever, multiply that by 3 times, 3 WrestleManias, and stack them on top of each other, and you have one WWE-Saudi event. And this is the 7th one, so I think that means they're up to $350 million so far with this event that they've collected from the General Sports Authority.
You had something to say?
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention earlier that I also feel is kind of weird / interesting about this one. So they decide to do a mainline pay-per-view there, and the pay-per-view they choose to take over there to the country where they're going to be doing propaganda for the country that's doing genocide in Yemen is the one where they changed the name of the pay-per-view in Germany to not run afoul of their anti-Holocaust glorification laws. That's a choice.
Well, that's the other aspect to this is that there's so much, it really, like, going into that Crown Jewel 2018 event, that it just, like, there was, and I only watched it again last night, was like the John Oliver piece where going into that, okay, so we're just a month removed from the Jamal Khashoggi murder, and they're promoting, that's the show that has Shawn coming out of retirement with Hunter against Kane and Undertaker. So they put out a post with the Undertaker's urn, with DX spray painted on the urn, and the tagline, "Respect is out the window at WWE Crown Jewel," with this urn that has been defaced. And it is just like, you just can't navigate around any of this. Like the idea that, as you're promoting these shows, I mean, it's just, it is what it is. I mean, it's just, this is typical pro wrestling promotion, but when you put this veil on top of it, it has such a, an elimination chamber that just comes with like it just opens itself up for ridicule. But that is the cost of doing business, and a $50 million payment each time out. As you look at this, Brandon, just like objectively.
I got to interrupt for a second. Just
sure.
Because this is kind of important in the context of what you were just saying. we also need to remember that less than 3 weeks after that crown jewel, there was that very awkward Stephanie McMahon line on Raw about how dismemberment is a bit of a corporate liability.
That's right. Yeah, that was immediately after that. Yeah, it's you can go through these. There's plenty of those examples. But if you are the government of Saudi Arabia, Brandon, are you happy with this relationship? Like, we're not even at the midway point yet. You're spending a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's minimal to them that you're getting this level of exposure and a partner in WWE that, I mean, will you when you're in business with WWE, this is what you're going to get with them. I mean, they are all in on these shows. Like, are you looking at this like 10 years? Man, we can't wait to re-up with
$1 billion
with this company.
Yeah, I don't know. You asked me to put myself in the mindset of the government of Saudi Arabia. That's a challenge. I would imagine. I mean, they're the ones who agreed ahead of time $50 million per event, and I mean, like, practically speaking, it's causing conversations like this to happen and raise awareness about just what their government is up to. But I do think the majority of, well, I don't know about the majority. There's a lot of wrestling fans who are totally unaware of what's happening and why these events are getting the criticism that they get, or many fans are probably not even aware that they get criticism for these. Although, there were occasions where the Crown Jewel promo on the one, I think it was SmackDown, got booed. And they did the Evolution pay-per-views as sort of a make-good for the women who couldn't be there. But yeah, I think for most fans, it's not a huge deal, and it's probably doing what the government wants it to do in terms of, I think the biggest product for this is that you get a globally broadcast event. It's not just on TV in the United States. I mean, it's not a massive audience, but it's a pretty big audience. Oh, the reach will be its highest ever on Peacock.
That's
it
right.
will be.
That's right. Many percentage increase.
That this is a normal place, and it seems okay here. There's regular American style entertainment here, so maybe it's not that bad of a place. And I'm sure there's nothing. I don't want to make it sound like we're conflating that. Oh, there's bad people in Saudi Arabia. I'm sure there's a lot of enthusiastic WWE fans who will be in attendance, and I'm sure there's plenty of good people in Saudi Arabia, average citizens. But what we're talking about here is the government, which is an autocratic government, where women's rights are limited and there's human rights violations. There's a blockade of Yemen, where there's a famine, and there's basically no LGBT rights. If you're, the same-sex activity is basically illegal, and there's and
that's worth noting that Sonia Deville is one of the women on the card this Saturday, and I don't know if that will even be brought to light on the broadcast or not. Like, that
I'm sure it won't be. I mean,
I don't think so either. But it is notable that she is on this card.
Yeah, like Saudi Arabia politically appears to be. Oh yes, they're willing to make certain accommodations when it comes to women's rights, but they do not appear to be moving on LGBTQ rights. But, and W has a number of people who are openly gay or bisexual or whatever it is, and I always wonder about that. And how is that being dealt with? And I don't know if I would feel safe there if I were a gay person being on one of these shows. But yeah.
Well, guys, I want to thank you. You guys stayed for this great chat. I really appreciate you guys coming on. Me personally, like, I have a real hard time just covering these shows as typical wrestling shows. I think these conversations are very important. I don't think we do enough of them, to be quite frank. So I want to thank both of you. I thought of you two immediately as the best people to come on and chat about this. And I want to get both of you to let our viewers and listeners know where they can read more from you, starting with you, Mr. Bixenspan. You have a feature out with FanBite, just looking back 25 years removed from Shawn Michaels vacating the WWF Championship, and a very famous promo that you've kind of recontextualized 25 years later.
Yeah, it was 25 years ago. This past Tuesday was the infamous Raw Thursday special, because Raw was preempted for the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show that week. Which
all these years later, still getting bumped from their home broadcast.
And boy, does that sound weird to people who didn't experience it either. But Yes, rich people watch dog shows, so even though if it does lesser ratings, then
And
there is an
Canadians watch
appearance there.
curling because TSN bumped it all over the place for curling. Curling still dominates.
So are you saying I need to hurry hard through my plugs here?
Very nice. Very nice.
But anyway, yeah. So I have have an article at Fanbyte, kind of trying to look back at the Lost My Smile interview and how, with hindsight, between what he says there, what he said since, what was being covered at the time, what was already known about him in the previous year and a half, with that he was passed out in the car when those guys dragged him out and beat him up in Syracuse, that he had, repeatedly lost his temper in the middle of matches on pay-per-view, that he had repeatedly tried to strip naked, both on pay-per-view and sometimes succeeded at house shows. This is a guy who was breaking down. And I think if you view it through how we've been viewing stuff, especially lately, like with the Moxley stuff, like with some of the stuff Eddie Kingston has said, I think it looks a lot different. So I have that there. I have some other stuff there that's come out in the last few weeks. And I should have something up in the next week or so also about the 25th anniversary of the original 6 weeks of Shotgun Saturday Night, as Vince McMahon's weird, would you call it his vision of what an ECW type show would look like, I guess.
I imagine he sat down to watch it, and this was his takeaway from ECW. Let's
so that'll be up probably I would guess early next week. Of course, I got my Substack at babyfacevheel.com. The last thing I put up there was the story about how there probably wasn't actually a rule that allowed the New York State Athletic Commission to kick Nick Wayne off the GCW show at the Hammerstein. And also some of Brandon's friends in Buffalo get brought up too, because they had some related run-ins with the commission a few months ago. So that's up there, and also Between the Sheets, available on all your favorite podcast platforms. We actually did cover Raw Thursday on the show that's out this week. We covered 96 on the show that's out Monday, including the In Your House with the Brett Diesel cage match, and the first Larry Fling Live Billionaire Ted skit on Raw. So that's on there. And of course, we have our Patreon at patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets, where instead of covering a week in history as we do on the main show, we do deep dives. Last month was for the 30th anniversary of the end of the TWA, the first Super Indie. We covered Joe Goodhart. This month, we're covering the beginnings of ROH, and tons of stuff in the archives, including 8 parts on ECW on TNN and the end of ECW. The sale of WCW, lots of Paul Heyman content, especially, and Eddie Gilbert content. But that's at patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets for people who do $5 a month or higher, or the discounted annual version.
And Brandon, what is coming up this Sunday? I'm sure you'll have a match-by-match breakdown of Elimination Chamber with Chris Gullo.
Yes, we'll be doing a play-by-play of the event. No, I don't know. I have to write some slides. That usually happens Friday and Saturday night. But tonight I'll be doing live TV ratings talking about the TV ratings just a little while after the Dynamite rating comes out this afternoon. The Pro Wrestling Industry Report 2021 is out with 72 pages of key metrics, insights, analysis. You can get that through patreon.com/WrestleNomics and through a PayHip link that is on my pinned to the top of my Twitter account. I just wrote the other day an estimate. So if you're into W stock, I just wrote an estimate the other day that is on Patreon now. It'll be on the .com free website a few days later. Just estimating what I think W's going to report for 2022 for each quarter of the year.
Awesome stuff, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Tomorrow, in this very same time, I'm going to be joined by Garrett Gonzalez from Fight Game Media and the Wrestling Observer site. We'll be going all over the headlines, and Wei Ting will be live later today, 3 Eastern, for all our patrons with the Wellness Policy with Jordan Goodman and Neil Flanagan. And that is going to wrap it up for your post-daily news update.